We take some time on Monday mornings, and we're joined by the publisher of Idaho Weekly Briefing, and that's Randy Staples, who is among the deans of journalism in this part of the country and talks some Idaho issues and really various Idaho issues. Randy is also a columnist whose work can be read not only in the briefing but statewide. And column yesterday that he put together dealt with this issue of licensing, occupational licensing, which I'm a reader of the Heritage Foundation's Daily Signal. And that's been a big issue for that publication for the last few years. And some states where people who braid hair have had to go out and go through expensive coursework and then buy an expensive license. And there's a belief that people are just simply trying to eliminate competition. And it's a hot topic. And I was telling him off air that Wayne Hoffman has written about it, although he's managed to get the wrath of some of our legislators by doing it. Hoffman with the Idaho Freedom Foundation. But we also have a lieutenant governor who'd like this whole situation reviewed, and perhaps there'll be more discussion of it coming up. Randy, first of all, welcome back to the program.
Good to be back.
It's 8:43 on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. We're at 48. Your column yesterday dealt with Lieutenant Governor Brad Little and his approach to this, and I guess there's a belief that periodically we should be reviewing something like this to see if it's actually working, or perhaps fears that it could be discriminatory. Where do you think it's going to go?
Well, I think first of all that the licensing, as well as a whole lot of other things that government does, should be reviewed from time to time to see whether it's still working as it was originally intended, see whether it might work better, to see whether it's still something or was ever something that we should have been doing to begin with. Those should be questions that should from time to time pop up, so that we're not just blindly doing something because it was done 50 years ago. But beyond that, there's always the question of the points that you were raising. Why are we doing the particular licensing that we're doing? And there are various reasons for that, some of them that relate to real public service and some of them that don't. There are reasons why that can involve public safety, because if you have completely unqualified or quack people doing critical things, working on, sawing into your body or putting in an electrical system in your house, there are lives at stake that could be lost if these people don't know what they're doing. So there's some need for that at least to a point, but where does that start to shade into other kinds of motivations as well? Because when you heighten the bar to get into a particular occupation, then you're limiting the number of people that are in it, and there's an automatic benefit to that. If in another kind of licensing, liquor licensing, there's always a very big concern about who has liquor licenses, how many there are. If you threw open if you were to, for example, say that a liquor license cost $1 a year and that anybody who wanted one could get one, there would be a whole bunch of people in Idaho that would have a big problem with that, because they've invested a lot of money in it, and they and a significant amount of their profit generates from the fact that they don't have very many competitors, or not as many as they might have, in terms of selling it. And the same kind of general economic principle can apply with licenses too. So I think it's worth reviewing where all the motivations come from, and what the public benefits are. But the one other point that I wanted to make was that because of that, it's not as simple a matter as simply saying that government should be regulating or should not be regulating something, because the real push to get these regulations in place doesn't come from an obscure bureaucrat somewhere. It tends to come from the occupation itself, from the people who are actually doing it.
I was when you mentioned electricians, and I had a fleeting thought. There's an old Three Stooges short where they build a new home for their wives, and the door is sideways in the background, and there's the bathtub is hanging on the wall. You don't want to get into that situation with people who don't know what they're doing.
Mm-hmm. It can be a problem if you have serious, important uh, kinds of work that's being done that way. Of course, there are also licensed a number of occupations that a lot of people would say don't necessarily rise to that level of criticality. You know, why necessarily do you license some of the people that we do? And not all of them necessarily are going to be matters of life and death, or will necessarily cause you grave harm if they don't do their work absolutely right.
This has been the
But
battle in
it's
some big cities.
that can be a matter of opinion.
This has been the battle in many cities where you've got taxi licensing, and then there's been the battle between the taxi drivers and Uber drivers, and how do we best balance, liberty and what's best for the consumer.
Exactly, exactly. The in many cities, the cities tightly regulate taxi drivers, and the biggest proponents of that tight regulation are the taxi drivers and the taxi companies.
You had every week, in fact, we should point out in the Idaho Weekly Briefing, you have a rundown of gasoline prices, highest and lowest around the state of Idaho. And I was driving on Saturday. I passed, I think, the Walmart in Twin Falls, where they've been open about a year and a half with pumps, and I think the pump price was 235.9. I got to Kimberly and realized I needed gas, and I stopped in Kimberly and paid 263.9 for gasoline. We're seeing quite a lot of wide swings around the state, and the other thing I've noticed too, as well, is that we seem to be running slightly above the national average at the moment.
At the moment, Idaho is. Often, Idaho is slightly below the national average. It varies a little bit, but it's usually not too far from it. It's usually not one of the highest, not one of the lowest. The regional variations in this have interested me for a long time, because I'm not really sure why some of the areas that are notably high and notably low are so notably high and notably low. Twin Falls has a little bit of a different kind of situation than some, because of the octane levels that are in some of the that are to be found in some of the gasoline that's sold there, and not all communities have that. But here once again we get into questions of regulation and who wants what. But it's some interesting variations, and it's not, the gas prices overall don't seem to be seeing the kind of drop that you sometimes see right around this time of year.
And one thing I've noticed that I find fascinating when you list these prices is it's not always the same city that has the lowest price. Some weeks you'll find the lowest price in Pocatello, other times you'll find it here. But there's no real. You would think that some cities always have the lowest price, but that's not the case.
That's not the case. There are some that are relatively consistent as having some low prices. Twin Falls and Pocatello and Coeur d'Alene seem to pop up fairly often, and sometimes the West Boise and Nampa areas do. There's a gas station that at Caldwell that I found is one of the best ones in the Boise metro area, that almost always seems to have the lowest price in that area. But it does vary quite a bit.
I was going to say, when I get off the highway, sometimes at Mountain Home, I get sticker shock. Uh, and I've seen it change sometimes 7, 8 cents a day if I go back and forth on my way to Boise and think, why didn't I buy this morning?
And it depends a great deal on where exactly you're getting the gas. If you go into a little bit more rural, a little bit more remote communities, then you sometimes find much higher prices. They can be relatively high up in the Wood River Valley or up at Stanley. McCall has some high gas prices, and a number of other communities like that do too. Island Park is often one of the highest.
Our guest is Randy Staples. He's the publisher of Idaho Weekly Briefing. We're at 47, and it's 8:51 on News Radio 1310 KLIX and News Radio 1310.com with Bill Colley. For people who'd like to see the briefing, where would you send them?
I would send them to ridenbaughpress.com. That's RIDENBAUGH press.com.
We have the rise of the drones in Idaho. You have a piece
that sounds like a good movie title.
Yeah, it might be. If somebody else might have already had something similar, we'd have to probably fight them over the copyright.
Mashup of movie titles.
Yes. We have drone training. You have a piece about drone training going on. we're going to be seeing a lot more of these things in the sky.
I think we will. There are all kinds of possible uses for them. Some of them are pretty clearly good uses. A next door neighbor of mine does some consulting for agricultural areas and uses drones for evaluation of what the fields are like and how things are growing. You know, that's one kind of use. State police is getting into making some use of it, and we've seen some of the results of that on their website. We've seen pictures that they've been able to take, things like that. The big event in Malheur and in Wildlife Refuge a little over a year ago in Oregon, the big standoff there. At the tail end of that, when law enforcement was kind of closing in, we actually got some good drone shots of what was going on in the tail end of that. And I think we'll be seeing a lot more of that. But obviously, there need to be some rules in place to determine how you use that kind of thing. Do you really want one of these kind of drones just circling around your backyard, sending pictures off to who knows where?
Although
And
we currently have what helicopters and airplanes doing the same thing.
we do, but drones can be a little bit more direct, a little closer, maybe a little bit more invasive. If a helicopter is coming in and circling overhead, you pretty well know it. With a
Yeah,
drone, it may not be quite so obvious.
I was at a Memorial Day celebration in Buell, or not celebration, commemoration, a couple of weeks ago, and I heard a sound almost like a swarm of bees, and that's when I realized there was a drone filming what was going on below. And it was strange to actually be at a solemn event like that and literally hear that noise in the background.
The capabilities are quite interesting. I've seen what the images are that can come out of some of the drones, even some of the relatively cheap ones, and they can be remarkably good. And the cost is so low that of course now they're consumer items. Electronic stores sell them for very low prices. You know, almost anybody can get one. Although I'm not sure what I'm intrigued by them, but I have yet to figure out what practical use I could put one to.
We've got about a couple of minutes to go, and I'm probably not going to do it justice, but they had marked it up one time in March, and now Raul Labrador and Bob Goodlatte are back with a bill in the House of Representatives to give states more control over refugee resettlement programs. Do you think it's going to go anywhere?
It may have a little bit of a hard sell, just in that I'm not sure that that's a subject that a lot of members of Congress are going to want to deal with very directly at all. It could be something that Labrador may well want to bring up on the campaign trail. This has been probably the most direct immigration related item that he's brought up during the time he's been in Congress, and which is kind of remarkable considering that a lot of what he did in private practice as an attorney related to immigration related law. But it's kind of an interesting approach, and it may get some traction at least in the House for a while.
I was going to say maybe a year and a half ago, I was speaking with Governor Otter on the show, and the subject came up, and he at the time I think was saying that he would like to have as governor, at least the state legislature, to have more of a say in this program because they feel as if I don't think that anyone's saying that we're being dumped upon, but they feel that they should have a bit more control over a program as to who comes here, who doesn't.
A little more local control, and something like that could very well be in the works over time. A little bit of shared control there to a degree, anyway, so that you have something that local people can buy into or have an avenue to oppose if they want to.
We got about a minute left. I didn't mention this to you earlier in the email this morning, but have we heard? Just curiously, since we talked about Labrador in his campaign, have we any rumblings at all about Democrats getting into the race for governor yet?
Have not heard a single one yet.
Wow.
Presumably there will be one at some point. There has not been Democrats have not failed to nominate someone for governor in the state's history, but Not yet, and I'm not hearing that it's likely to happen anytime real soon.
And Labrador vacating his seat, not many Democrats seem interested at this point in jumping into that race as well.
Not at this point, not in Idaho. And nationwide, there's a lot of interest among Democrats jumping into congressional races. But in Idaho, maybe it's a matter of having been burned so many times that there's simply some reluctance to do that, even when the seat is open, which usually means that it's a little bit easier to try to take or go after than when a seat is occupied and you have to knock out an incumbent.
Well, Randy, we've got to wrap up, but for people who'd like to check out the briefing once more, where would you send them?
I'd send them to ridenbaughpress.com. That's RIDENBAUGH press.com.
We'll speak again next Monday morning.
Talk to you then.
Take care, sir. Randy Staples joining us this morning, publisher of Idaho Weekly Briefing. He joins us Monday mornings on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. One more hour of Top Story is just ahead with Bill Colley. We'll have news from Fox at 9 o'clock. A lot to talk about in the next hour. Likely won't get to all of it, but we'll try. If you're a Christian, when it comes to job hunting, should you need not apply? Bernie Sanders apparently thinks that's the case. Talk a little bit about that coming up following news at Fox, as I said, at 9 o'clock.